So we've all been there before. You're at the store minding your own business when suddenly you see an adorable planter that you just cannot pass up. You buy the planter, you bring it home, maybe you even stop at the nursery on the way to pick up the perfect plant to put in it. You get home and you immediately go to plant that plant directly in that pot. Stop. Don't do it. Trust me when I say you will regret that decision. So today I want to talk to you about the hidden dangers that these little items that we all rely on to home our plants in potentially poses to our plants, and whether or not a specific type of pot is going to pose a potential problem with your plant or not quite frequently has to do with the type of plant in question. So today we're just going to go through the various types of pots that are available on the market and things to take into consideration when deciding how to use that specific pot, because there are multiple ways to use pots, you guys. But first, why did I say you would regret planting that plant directly into the pot featured in the intro to this video? That is because once that plant became root bound to the point that it needed to be repotted, the only way you are going to be able to get that plant out of that pot is to just destroy a large number of the roots on that plant, or B, and this is honestly the most likely scenario, by smashing that pot that you spent your hard-earned money on. So the first thing you always need to take into consideration when deciding whether or not you are going to plant a plant directly into a pot is the shape of the pot. So this is a straight up cylindrical shape, but I would like to show you this standard terracotta pot first, because this is one of the easiest shape pots to get a plant out of once it becomes root bound, and that is because the sides flare slightly outward. This pot, the sides don't flare, and there is a little bit of a lip up there in the top that could cause a problem trying to get the plant out of there. It's not going to be a huge problem, but this will still be somewhat easier. I say somewhat because there's a whole nother situation that poses a problem with terracotta pots that we'll get to in a bit. But the problem with some planters is that they have what I am going to describe as undercuts. So I do have a degree in industrial design, which is product design, you guys. And undercuts are basically, when you're designing a product, they're things that you can't do in certain scenarios depending on how a product is being created. Because if you have an undercut, so for example, think about an ice cube tray. It's the best analogy ever for this. Ice cube trays, the part that the water goes in flares out on the sides so that the ice cubes can easily come out. If the sides flared slightly inward, like you see on this pot, or if it was completely crazily shaped, like the pot we saw in the intro to this video, once that water froze into ice, you would not be able to get those ice cubes out of the tray. Same thing applies for your pots. So you don't want undercuts. And what that means is you don't want a space where there is less than a 90-degree angle for soil to be trapped into, because once the roots spread around and become root bound, the roots are going to be trapped in there. Now, something like this is still going to be easier to probably get the plant out without smashing the pot, but the more severe that undercut angle, the more likely it is you are going to have to smash the crap out of that pot in order to get the plant out. So, beyond that, what considerations should we take before choosing to plant a plant directly into a pot? So, I personally, in case you are new here, I do not like to plant directly into what I describe as decorative planters. And by decorative planter, I mean all of the beautiful, stylish pots that look way better than your standard plastic nursery pot. So why don't I like to plant directly into these? Well, for starters, I have no clue what's going on in this pot. Beyond being able to stick my finger in there to check how wet the soil is, I can't see the roots. I can't keep an eye on the roots. I can't see if maybe there's potentially the start of root rot developing on a plant. I can't see how root bound the plant is. I don't like not being able to see what is going on in my plant's pants, as it were. Now, the other thing is, sometimes I like to relocate plants around my house. I'm sure you guys know how it is. You go to the store, you find a new plant, you bring it home, you're like, where the heck am I gonna put this thing? Hopefully you've done your research, you figure out it needs really bright light, you have no room in the brightest windows in your house for any more plants, so you start deciding, what plant am I gonna move somewhere else so I can put this plant in that window? Well, if you have potted directly into your decorative pot, let's say that this was a bright red pot, because honestly, this is pretty neutral. It would go okay in any room in my house, but let's say it's bright red. I only have one room where I have red accents, and that is in my upstairs living room. That is the only place that I will put a pot that has red on it. So if I'm in a situation where I have planted directly into a bright red pot, and I did that because I initially had put that that plant in a room that had red decor, and now suddenly I need to move it to another room where I have all neutral tones, that red pot is going to stand out like a sore thumb. And you don't want to have to be replanting your plants into new pots every time you want to move them to a different location. So there's several solutions to this. One, don't buy brightly colored pots, just stick to like a white neutral palette. Or two, you can do what I do and use your decorative pots as basically cover pots, also sometimes referred to as cache pots. And all that entails is keeping your plant either in the nursery pot that it came in, or if you're like me and you like to be able to keep an eye on what's going on with those roots, planting it into a clear pot. And then all you have to do is put that plant inside of that decorative pot and put it into the room where you want it to live. This honestly, in my personal experience, is the easiest thing to do if you are new to plants. It also is great because it helps you learn better how to water your plants, because you can also see how wet that plant is. So hopefully you guys can see I watered this one yesterday. That is very, very damp soil in there. But as it dries out, it will become lighter in color and I will be able to see how much it is drying out. I cannot recommend this enough, especially if you're somebody who likes to constantly redecorate your house. Like, do not, I repeat, do not plant your plants directly into your decorative planters. But what other threats does planting directly into a decorative planter pose? Well, it depends on the planter, and once again, it depends on the type of plant. Terracotta, super popular for people. Not my personal favorite because I'm not a big fan of orange, but if you like that kind of rustic look, that boho chic look in your house, terracotta is definitely a great way to go. However, terracotta poses several problems. Number one, it is a rough surface. And honestly, this will apply not just to terracotta, but basically any type of ceramic, unfinished ceramic or clay pot. And by unfinished, I mean on the interior, if it is rough, if it does not have a glaze of sorts over it. And basically we have two major concerns when it comes to planting plants directly into a pot that is unfinished and rough on the interior. Number one, your roots are gonna stick to it. It's just what's gonna happen. It's what's gonna happen, you guys. You're gonna go to repot that plant. You're going to use a butter knife or something else to kind of work the soil and the roots away from the edge of the pot. You're gonna tug, it's gonna feel stuck. You're gonna tug again, it's still gonna feel stuck. You're gonna use the butter knife a little bit more around that edge, and finally that pot's gonna come out. You're gonna think everything's good, and then you're gonna look in the bottom of that pot and there are gonna be a bunch of roots stuck on the inside of that pot. That is because the rougher the surface is, the easier it is for the roots to attach to it. Now, an even bigger thing to keep in mind when potting directly into a terracotta pot, and I want to be clear, you guys, I'm not saying never plant directly into a terracotta pot or a decorative pot. I'm just trying to help you guys understand the potential things you are going to face if you do, to help make the right decision for the specific plant in question. The other thing to know about terracotta pots specifically, and any other basically unfinished interior pot, is that these typically are going to absorb water away from the roots of your plants. So why is this important? Well, it's important for several reasons. One, how that affects your plant is going to depend on the type of plant, and is it a plant that likes to dry out more in between waterings, or is it a plant that likes to stay more on the moist side? And two, are you an overwaterer or an underwaterer? Because most of us are prone one direction or the other. Some of us are kind of in the middle, but at some point I'm sure you were one or the other. Some of us, like me, tend to lean towards overwatering, and then at a certain point in my life I went kind of the opposite direction, and now I'm kind of back in the middle and maybe leaning a little bit more towards overwatering. But all of these things will come into play with how your plant reacts if you plant into an unfinished pot like this. And so it's not going to be the same for everybody. That's what I'm getting at here. If I'm an overwaterer, this actually might be a good thing, because this will help, if I am watering my plants too frequently, it will help pull some of that excess moisture away from the plant's roots, absorb it into the pot, and that's actually going to help prevent my plant from potentially developing root rot because I watered it too soon. However, if you are an underwaterer and it is a plant that wants to stay moist, you're kind of setting yourself up for a slight failure situation because you're already probably not watering the plant often enough. And then when you are watering it, your pot isn't doing you any favors because that plant is super thirsty. It wanted that drink 4 days ago, and now your pot's stealing half the water from it. And then you might see your plant start to decline. So that is a major consideration to think about when choosing to pot inside of a planter that is rough and unfinished on the interior. Now, if it is a plant that likes to dry out in between waterings, this can actually be a good thing because it will help make sure, once again, that the roots are not staying too moist. But on the flip side, we have planters such as this one right here that are glazed on the inside. So this has a smooth, slick finish on the interior. You can also find terracotta pots that are glazed both inside and out as well. And the first advantage of this over this is that you're not going to have the issue of the roots getting stuck to the inside of this because it is a slick surface. The roots are going to have a harder time adhering to it. But the downside here is it is going to keep the moisture trapped in here. So if you are an overwaterer, you could be setting yourself up for failure by using pots that are glazed on the inside and watering too frequently, because then all that moisture is just sitting trapped in there versus over here where some of it is getting pulled back out by the pot. Now, if you are an underwaterer though, this could be your best friend because it will help trap more of that moisture in there that your plant is so desperately wanting. Now, another thing I want to mention briefly is that most of these decorative pots, as you will notice, do not have drainage holes. This one doesn't. I don't even think this terracotta one doesn't even have it. Most terracotta ones I see do. Not this one though. This one I believe does. So if possible, always buy decorative pots that have a drainage hole. However, if you do buy one, and I'm telling you right now, there's probably more available on the market that don't have drainage holes than do. Keep in mind that if you are watering directly in this, and I'm not going to say that you can't, it is possible to grow plants in what is known as no drainage. I have a few growing in no drainage myself that are not semi-hydro. They're in a substrate of sorts. But it is a very tricky thing to do, especially if you are new to plants. I do not recommend it. I personally don't even like to do it, which is why I acquired several different drill bits that will allow me to drill through ceramic and clay without completely cracking the pot. And if you're wanting to plant directly into any type of decorative planter, I 100% recommend that that's what you do. Now, if you're using this as a cover pot, don't do it. Like really, you guys, don't do it, because what will happen is I have drainage holes in this pot here, and this water will come through when I water this plant, and a little bit of it will settle in here. And if you have a drainage hole, I don't care if even if it has a stopper like we saw on this one, that thing is not foolproof. Telling you right now, and I have almost ruined some surfaces in my house from water leaking through these, which is why I cannot recommend enough to you to invest in some of these handy little felt coasters, which I have linked in my Amazon storefront down below in the description for you. These things are a furniture lifesaver, you guys, and even if you have a pot that does not have a drainage hole, such as on this concrete planter right here, which by the way, unfinished concrete planters are going to behave the exact same way as your unfinished terracotta, unfinished clay, unfinished ceramic, whatever it may be, it will pull water away from your plants. But even if you don't have a drainage hole here, the planters like this that pull water away from your plant, if they are not glazed on the bottom, that water is not just going to get pulled to the sides of the pot. It's going to get pulled to the bottom of the pot. That pot is going to get damp. If you have it on wood furniture, it will ruin your wood furniture unless you have something like this underneath it to protect it. Once again, can't recommend these enough. But maybe at this point you are thinking to yourself, you know what, maybe she has the right idea. Maybe I should just keep my plants in their nursery pots, or better yet, put them into clear nursery pots so you can keep an eye on those roots, and just use decorative pots as cover pots. Well, hold up for 1 second, because not all plastic pots are created equal, and they can come with their own set of problems as well. So the first thing to know about plastic pots of any kind, and anything you're turning into a plastic pot. So I do have these little solo type cups that I use, that I add drainage holes to plant my plants in. So let's just call these plastic containers. Any type of plastic container that you might be wanting to plant your plant directly into. The problem that we discussed with watering plants that are in glazed pots, so pots that have a glazed finished interior, you're gonna have that same problem with most plastic containers. I'll explain what I mean by most here in a second. So for example, this is going to trap moisture inside more so than this, which as we discussed is going to pull some water away from the plants. So if you are an overwaterer, that could be concerning. However, if you're an overwaterer and you're using a clear plastic container, you're going to be able to gauge better if that plant actually needs to be watered or not. So that is going to help offset what might happen if you plant the plant directly in the planter in this situation, where you might think it's dry enough and it's not. When you're in this situation, you'll be able to tell better. And because of that, I think this is a safer option than this if you are an underwaterer, because you're just going to have a better visual idea of if that plant actually needs to be watered. Now, if it is a plant that likes to dry out a lot in between waterings, really doesn't like to have wet feet, as we like to call it, this could be concerning. You could have a worry about, well, it's too much moisture trapped in there. Well, that's where pots with what I like to refer to as ventilation come into play. I do have these linked in my Amazon storefront down in the description below for you. There are also the standard orchid pots, which have, instead of round holes on the sides, they have narrow vertical slits on the sides. Pots like this allow more airflow. They allow that moisture to escape more quickly. This, in my opinion, is almost like taking a plastic container or a glazed interior type container and turning it a little bit more into one of these, but you have the added benefit of your roots still aren't going to get stuck to the insides of these. So this is definitely a good option. I have started using pots like this for all of my anthurium. They really don't like the roots to stay too wet, and they are absolutely loving it. So can't recommend that enough, especially if you're an overwaterer. If you're an underwaterer, maybe stick to the solid plastic. But are all plastic containers created equally? And is it actually safe for your plants to live in these for an extended period of time? Now, the reason I pose this question is because I'm sure we are all aware of the fact that in the food and beverage industry, a beverage must be put into a specific type of plastic bottle if being sold in a plastic bottle in order to ensure our safety and make sure that the plastic is not leaching into the beverage inside, which got me to wondering, can plastic leach from these into our plants? And the short answer to the question is, unfortunately, yes. Now, I did notice a while back that these cups, which I acquired from Target, and these cups, which I got from Amazon, I was experiencing different things in plants that I had planted in these that had been in them for over a year. I started having issues with the plants that were in these pots versus these. And I wasn't sure why, but that's when I got to wondering if plastic is safe to pot our plants in for an extended period of time. And what I learned from my favorite soil scientist up in Canada, be sure to go give her a follow, especially if you are an outdoor gardener. And what I learned from her is that yes, plastics can leach from these into our plants just like they do for food and beverages that are placed in plastic containers. So what type of plastic is it that we really want to be using if we are going to plant our plants directly into plastic containers? Well, not surprisingly, it's basically the same kind of plastic that we want our food and beverages that we consume to be put in. So why I think I was seeing varying changes in my plants planted between these two is because this is a number one type of plastic. Now, when I say number one, I'm referring to that little triangular symbol on the bottom of all plastic containers, or most plastic containers, that tells us whether or not it can be recycled. I believe it goes from a 1 to a 6, and 1 is no bueno, and this is a 1, which begs the question why this is being sold as a drinking cup if it is a 1. I don't know. So I am convinced that this was potentially causing the problem with the plants that I had potted for an extended period of time in these, and I was not experiencing the same problem with this because this is a 5. So a 1 is what is known as PETE. I will put what it stands for up on the screen for you. And these expire, you guys. Now, if you do buy a beverage, for example, in a container like this that has a 1, it will usually come with an expiration date because at that point you're running a risk of too much plastic leaching into that beverage and making it not safe to drink. So same thing can happen with our plants if we leave them in these too long, which is why I won't be using those anymore. Now, the second type of plastic, which honestly, I have not come across this on any planters, like actual nursery pots or anything I bought to use as a nursery pot, but just so you know, it is HDPE. Once again, if you want to know what it stands for, I will flash it up on screen for you. This is what is known as number 2. This is not great either. Basically, what you need to know, you guys, the higher we go up on the number scale, the safer the plastic is for our plants and for ourselves. So we don't really want to do a 2 either. I believe 3 is LDPE. I think 5 is just PP, if I recall correctly. And honestly, 5 is what you're going to be wanting to use. If you look at most of your nursery pots, when you go to the plant store, check the bottom of them. Most of them are going to have a number 5. The plant industry already knows that is what's safest for the plant. Now, how long can it live in a 5 pot without having detrimental effects? Let's just think about it this way, you guys. Let's just assume that our pots, our plastic pots, are going to expire at a certain point. At a certain point, we probably need to retire the plastic pots, toss them in the recycling bin, and move on to a brand new pot. But the number 5 plastic pots are the safest ones. I have had some of my plants in number 5 plastic pots I have some that have been in there for at least 3 years and I have had no problems. So that is definitely the type of plastic that you want to make sure you're using if you're going to be planting directly into a plastic pot. And I know I just said that basically the higher we go up on the number, the safer the plastic is, with the exception of number 6. Number 6 is actually styrene. You want to avoid this at all costs because if it gets too hot, if it gets too cold, heat and cold can cause the molecules, the dangerous molecules in that styrene, to be released and absorbed by your plant. Now, the good news is, you guys, even if your plants are taking up some of what are known as micro or nanoplastics from the plastic pots that you have them planted in, as long as you have them planted in these number 5 pots, the amount that they're going to be taking up is negligible. There has been research done on this. Your plant's going to be okay. And honestly, in my experience, these start to fail after a while. They start to kind of discolor, they crack more easily, they become more brittle. That's probably a good sign of when it's time to retire that plastic pot. But once again, you guys, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I am just trying to provide you all of the relevant info, all of the relevant potential pitfalls for all of these types of pots so that you can make the best decision for you, your watering habits, your plants, and your lifestyle. But I hope you guys have found this video helpful. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And if you want to learn about some other repotting errors that I see people make quite frequently and how to avoid them, you can check out this video next. Thanks so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!